They told her to sit in the observation bay. No flight orders, no call sign. Just a clipboard marked non-rated systems technician and a cockpit she was not authorized to touch. As final checks ran and flight crews joked in coded shorthand, she sat still, watching more than they knew. Minutes later, an engine failure over open water left the front seat empty and every eye on the wrong part of the screen. And then everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The flight deck of USS Atlas was a living machine, louder than weather, brighter than memory, and layered in signals not everyone was trained to read. Its metal spine flexed beneath the motion of the sea, though no one spoke of that directly. Blast deflectors rose and dropped, safety chains retracted in clean, hydraulic rhythm. Deck crew barked confirmations through tight hand gestures, half of them swallowed by jet noise before they reached the next man's ears. Steam hissed along the catapult channels. The salt haze caught in the lights above Cat 3, making everything shimmer as though the day had been rendered twice. Cass stood at the periphery of this movement, still. Her boots were standard issue but unpolished. Her flight suit was regulation but unpatched, the fabric clean and unsponsored. The Velcro square over her chest was blank. She carried no tablet, no flight briefing binder, only a narrow soft-cover notebook clipped to her vest with a pressure lock. Its corners were frayed from use. The paper inside was hand-ruled and dense with diagrams, arrestor gear cable tolerances, rudder jitter arcs, wave-off lens distortions. She had logged every approach sequence the F-14s ran this week, cross-referenced with deck pitch, wind load, and visual cues from the LSO perch. No one had asked her to do this. No one knew she had. Her name was not on the manifest, not on the whiteboard inside Ready Room 2, not on the launch list printout the deck chief held as he walked past without looking at her. The clipboard he handed her bore the stamp Observer, Sim 0 in faded blue ink. The name stuck. Someone had written it beside a smiley face on the checklist cover in marker. She did not react. She flipped it open and traced her finger over the launch interval column. 2 minutes 40. That was longer than protocol. When she crossed to the tie-down grid, 2 techs looked up from a checklist and one of them, the taller one with the comms coil around his neck, nudged the other and said without turning, "Did the sim techs unionize or something?" The joke was quiet, but deliberate. She heard it. She kept walking. Behind her, the other one said, "Maybe she's here for the weather brief." The wind shifted. It smelled like fuel and steel. A third voice called out from the catwalk above the loader ramp. A younger pilot in a half-zipped G-suit pointed down toward her with his stylus still in hand. "Hey, you probably want the briefing tent. It's behind the tower. Logistics is color-coded red today." He grinned, but she didn't look up. Instead, she stopped by the edge of the safety barrier and lifted her chin just enough to track the angle of the F-14 parked at Cat 4. The aircraft's starboard stabilizer twitched once, then again. She made a small note in the margin of her notebook. It was the same pattern from the last 3 deck turns. She cross-referenced that, too. A flight tech approached with a tablet in hand, glanced at her flight suit, and began to hand it over before pausing. He looked again, frowned, then pulled the tablet back and muttered, "Oh, thought you were part of 4's systems crew." He walked away without apology. The deck noise rose with the next launch, a high screech followed by a hard thunderclap as the Tomcat roared off the bow and vanished into mist. Cass adjusted her collar and moved toward the rear of the lineup, scanning the blast barrier's alignment and noting its offset under the crosswind. Behind her, a conversation continued over intercom. One pilot laughed and said, "Hope she brought snacks. Jump seat's a long ride for dead weight." Another voice chuckled and added, "She better not talk during climb out. These birds don't come with mute buttons." Neither man lowered his volume. She passed the auxiliary fuel truck and glanced once at the hose coupling angle. Too wide. She logged it anyway. The F-14 she was assigned to sat quiet and ready beside the cat line. Its skin was faded, paint touched up by hand in spots, its forward panel still bearing the old call sign of a pilot who had retired 2 years earlier. She noticed a hairline crack in the right canopy hinge. It was stable. She still logged it. Her helmet rested in the crook of her arm, dull white with no insignia, no name tape, no command badge. It reflected the overhead floodlight without distinction. As she approached the aircraft, the deck crew parted without speaking to her. One gave a half gesture, the kind used for equipment carts, not people. She followed the shadow line of the starboard wing. The Tomcat loomed larger now, its geometry imperfect but known. Cass glanced once at the hook lever under the wing root. Locked. As expected. Still. She touched the checklist in her vest pocket, where she had drawn the tailhook arc from memory last night. The dimensions were exact. No one greeted her. No one verified her role. The pilot had not asked for her name. As she reached the boarding ladder, she heard another crewman mutter something behind her, but the engine startup drowned it out before the words formed. She climbed the steps one at a time, the metal cold through her gloves. Inside the cockpit, she moved with method, checking the system's readout screens out of habit, even though she was not authorized to touch controls. Her seat indicator read zeroed. She clicked her belt and waited. The pilot called out to tower, cheerful and loud. She looked forward, toward the windscreen, where the first tendrils of low cloud began to cross the horizon line. She did not speak. Outside, the deck moved as though nothing had changed, but she had already noticed 3 visual discrepancies between launch alignment and the last sim run. They would matter later. No one saw her make the notes. No one looked up. Not yet. The forward catwalk shimmered under the deck lights, waves of residual heat pulsing between fuel carts and the frame of the waiting aircraft. The F-14 sat wide and ready, nose turned slightly off-center to the catapult rail, tail fins angled in lazy symmetry. Its wing sweep system was still locked back for deck clearance. Cass moved quietly along the port side, her gloves tucked under one arm, helmet clipped at her side. She kept to the edge of the line, eyes tracking the maintenance markers without drawing attention. A junior deck tech paced past her with a tablet in hand. He glanced at her blank patch, made half a move to hand it off, then paused and turned away without explanation. A few meters farther down the line, a cluster of deck crew exchanged nods over the wing pin. Checklist. One of them pointed toward her with a tilt of the chin and said, "Loud enough to carry. Is she even strapped in? Or is this some kind of science fair ride-along?" Laughter followed. She said nothing. Cass stopped by the aft stabilizer and crouched to check the inspection tag near the fire suppression vent. The zip tie meant to secure the emergency pull line had slack in it just a few millimeters, but enough to fail an ops-level readiness check. She reached forward, noted the shift, and entered it into her pocket notebook. No one noticed. Farther forward, the pilot stood under the boarding ladder, gesturing with easy confidence as he greeted 2 officers walking by. He wore his vest unfastened, helmet tucked under one elbow, and a call sign printed in bold yellow across his shoulder strap. He looked over as she approached and grinned. "There she is. Sim 0. Right on time. You can grade me from the back if you keep the air sickness bag out of the way." His voice was broad and practiced, meant to amuse more than inform. She nodded once and stepped past him without reply. At the ladder, she clipped her helmet and gloves together, ran one hand along the frame of the front cockpit, and paused. A fuel trim warning tag near the primary manifold flickered once, then steadied. It wasn't a full error. Not yet. She waited 4 seconds, counted the cycle, and logged it in the corner of her notepad. The deck beneath her boots shifted, a forward pitch, subtle but noticeable. She looked across the carrier's bow where the flag on the LSO platform was stiff under wind, 7 knots stronger than the morning report. She flipped her notepad and traced a half arc below the cat line. Slight turbulence off the port catapult was pushing cross-current. No one else was looking. The launch chief signaled the crew to load. The pilot rolled his neck once, saluted the tower with a slow, theatrical flare, and shouted into his helmet mic, "Showtime." He climbed into the forward seat and settled in. Cass followed, her motion unbroken, slow and mechanical. In the rear cockpit, she tightened her harness by hand, not by pull tab. She set her helmet on, lowered the visor, and clicked into the comms net. No one addressed her. No check-in. No protocol confirmation. She adjusted her pressure gauge manually. The needle was half a tick off center. The analog throttle sat idle below her left knee. The grip had a slight tremble from deck vibration, too minor for most to feel. She logged it anyway. Outside, the F-14 began its slow taxi toward Catapult 3. The metal sang under its wheels. Cass remained still. She tapped the checklist once with her finger. The steps were all memorized. She had flown them a dozen times in simulation. They were exact. In the forward seat, the pilot laughed over the channel. "Relax. Sim 0. The plane does all the work." He didn't turn around. The sky ahead was open. The deck crew cleared the path. Cass stared straight ahead, visor down, hands on her knees. She had already seen the first problem with the angle of launch, but no one had asked. The descent pattern was clean at first. The F-14 held a shallow arc, its wings sweeping incrementally as the pilot trimmed for re-entry. Deck recovery was set to begin in under 3 minutes. Cass sat in the rear cockpit, visor down, checklist steady on her kneeboard. Her hands still. Boots braced. The engine hum was smooth enough to track by vibration alone. No deviation in pitch. No rudder bias. Everything was as expected. Then came the thud. It struck just forward of the left intake, a dense, wet impact that sent a split-second shudder through the airframe. Cass felt it before she heard it, a pressure shift more than a sound. The fuselage kicked slightly right. The engine tone dipped. A flash on the left panel caught her eye. One of the firelights lit yellow, then red, then flickered back. The pilot's voice cracked across comms. "Bird strike. Port side. Flame out reading." He began listing steps, some correct, some too fast. The light flickered again but didn't lock. The fire indicator cycled once, blinked red, and went dark. The right trim held. Engine 1 stabilized. "Mayday. Mayday. Call off approach. I'm punching out," he said. The canopy triggered. Wind roared into the cockpit. His ejection seat lifted cleanly. 1 second of blur, then silence. Cass stayed seated. The forward cockpit was empty. The yoke was slack. The F-14 drifted 5 degrees low. Alarms began to rise, pitch warning, stall tone, the soft whine of imbalance. She exhaled through her nose and touched the laminated systems card on her knee. Her eyes moved fast, but without panic. She read the altimeter. 600 feet. She watched the RPM's engine 1 held at 93%. The light had flickered, but the behavior was wrong for a true engine fire. "Command, this is Sim 0, she said, voice even. "Pilot has ejected. Backseat operational." The comms spiked. "Sim 0. Eject immediately. The deck's not cleared. Repeat. Eject." Cass flipped the cockpit control override. Her hands moved without rush. She took the yoke in both hands and rolled trim control left. The jet responded with a gentle yaw. She tapped the throttle with her heel and brought the pitch back half a degree. Engine 1 was responsive. The balance was uneven, but manageable. "Negative," she replied. "Firelight wasn't steady. Engine 1 is still alive." The radio went quiet. She reached forward to stabilize the glide path. The front panel readouts were analog, twitching just slightly with every adjustment. The tremor in the stick was familiar, not from experience, but from rehearsal. She had logged this configuration in simulation. She had built responses for it, line by line. The comms returned, fractured but urgent. "Sim 0, you are not authorized. Bail out now. Confirm you understand. She checked the trim one last time. Right side drift still low. She rolled it even and locked in descent. Her voice was quiet. Sim 0 actual, taking control. No one answered. Below, the carrier deck was still in motion. She could see the glint of the LSO platform, the narrow white line of the approach path drifting inside the final arc. The clouds ahead were low, brushed gray. The sea was calm, but the wind wasn't. She adjusted pitch again. The jet held. Inside the cockpit, the only sound was the pulse of the engine and the faint shake of airflow along the canopy seams. The pilot's seat in front of her was empty. His harness dangled against the left console. The fire indicator on the left panel blinked once more, then went dark for good. Cass kept one hand on the yoke, the other on throttle. Her checklist remained visible, the corner marked by pencil. Her laminated systems card sat where she had taped it before launch. Her breathing remained slow, even. No other aircraft shared the channel. The OpsNet had gone quiet. No instructions, no corrections. Just background static and the occasional clipped breath from someone forgetting to mute. She made 2 more adjustments. Aileron drag corrected, yaw snap minimal. The descent vector was clean. The carrier began prepping for recovery. Cass could see the arrestor cables flex. Deck crew moved into pattern. The LSO scanned for visual ID. Her aircraft code blinked on the approach scope, but no call sign was attached. Just numbers. Just a flight plan with no pilot listed. She stayed locked in. The F-14 adjusted once more under her hand, then held true. She centered it. Her voice broke through comms again. Clear, calm, final. Sim 0 actual, stable, 1 engine, lining up for approach. The sky had leveled into a bleached gray, thin and motionless except for the vertical drift of salt mist around the carrier's profile. The sea was moving more than it looked. Cass felt it through the flight path, every rise and dip translating into a rhythmic shift along her descent arc. The F-14 held at 600 feet, nose steady, wings angled in fixed sweep, 1 engine alive, the other cold, no AI assist, no auto trim. Her left hand rode the manual throttle with fingertips loose and exact, responding not to sound, but to pulse. Below, the USS Atlas tracked her vector in silence. On deck, the arresting gear system was already spooled and waiting. The landing signal officer adjusted his headset and leaned forward against the rail, searching for the aircraft's angle through the haze. One of the junior officers watching telemetry tilted his head and said quietly, "She's solo." The back seat's flying. In the cockpit, Cass moved like clockwork made human. Her right heel adjusted the rudder with fractional input. Her scan never broke pattern. Airspeed, sync rate, pitch, horizon. Repeat. Her eyes flicked once to the Fresnel lens suspended above the stern. The light grid showed amber, center. That was good. Slight drop still to come. The horizon line wasn't holding level, it was cresting with the sea swell, pitching forward 1 degree, then back. She tracked it like a tide chart. The radio crackled. Tomcat on vector 07. Wave off. Repeat. Wave off. Cass didn't respond. The call repeated. Carrier to inbound aircraft. You're cleared to punch. You do not have the ball. She adjusted 1/4 throttle. The jet responded with minimal lag. The throttle linkage had a slight hitch above 100.0%, but she was nowhere near redline. At 400 feet, she began her final line in. Her voice came through steady. I have the ball. Approach locked. The channel went silent again. On deck, the small group gathered behind the safety net. No one spoke. One of the crew chiefs lowered his clipboard. The drone camera tracking her path zoomed tighter. The jet was alone. The aircraft ID number blinked, but no call sign appeared on the screen. Cass felt the yoke shift under her grip. Minor buffet. Expected. Wind shear from port side was curling up under the left stabilizer, creating a slow yaw. She corrected with her foot. The trim nudged back to center. She kept her eyes on the meatball. the Fresnel image of light suspended in its frame. It dipped, wavered, and settled again. She matched its movement like a duet. The arrestor wires came into view, thin and glinting. The sea swelled again. The deck pitched half a degree forward. Cass called out the markers aloud, not for anyone else, but because she always had. 30 feet, 20, 15, tailhook live. Her thumb tapped the hook check. Extension confirmed. No vibration. Lock solid. Her breath matched the checklist rhythm. She had trained this pattern, not imagined it, not theorized. She had drawn it over and over until the Fresnel lens was a shape in her head, until every cable tension could be guessed by eye. 10 feet, 4. Her left hand slid down the throttle, shaving 0.5%. The jet came down. The tailhook caught cable 3. The F-14 slammed to a halt in a heartbeat, forward momentum arrested by 280 feet of wound steel and aircraft-grade friction. Cass kept her hand on the throttle. She didn't flinch. The airframe groaned once, then everything stilled. The nose dipped slightly, then rebounded. Her knees pressed into the console, boots firm against the floor mounts. Her grip remained exact. She powered down by the book, one switch at a time, cooling flow, avionics, trim hold, main battery. She waited for the deck crew to approach before touching the canopy latch. Her voice, last to speak, returned to the comms net as the flight tower recovered its breath. Sim 0 actual, down, deck 3 wire. The carrier deck was louder in stillness than it had been in motion. The F-14 rested on cable 3, canopy unlatched, steam curling from its fuselage like breath from a run. Cass waited a full count before releasing the last safety catch. The cockpit hissed as pressure equalized. She pushed the canopy open with both hands and felt the wind hit her face, sharp with salt and turbine wash. She sat there for a moment, helmet still on, visor up, as the deck crew approached without their usual rhythm. They came slow, unsure, eyes moving not to the front seat, which was empty, but to her. Someone reached for the cockpit ladder, then paused. The LSO jogged up from the rail line, slowed, and stopped halfway. His headset was crooked on his ear. He looked like he was trying to reconcile something he had seen but couldn't explain. Cass unclipped her harness. Methodical. Her gloves were soaked through. She peeled them off and tucked them under her vest. The sweat down her back had darkened the flight suit in uneven lines. Her blank patch stood out against the faded green. She stepped out of the cockpit and climbed down one rung at a time, her boots finding each ladder bar with practiced weight. When she reached the final step, her right boot slipped slightly, then caught. The clang echoed once across the deck. A chief stood near the wing root, mouth half open. Who the hell flew that bird, he asked. Cass said nothing. She didn't have to. The answer was already moving through the ship in signals and silence. Inside the Combat Information Center, screens were alive with overlapping data feeds. Telemetry traces ran side by side with video playback, drone footage overlaying the deck angle and crosshatch lines. A comms officer replayed the channel log. The room fell still as her voice repeated, low and exact. Sim 0, actual, taking control. Where's her file, one lieutenant asked. She's not listed as flight rated. Another replied, observer manifest only, sim technician. The commanding officer, still standing, leaned closer to the terminal. Then how the hell did she land it? No one answered. A junior tech flipped open the flight data log, eyes scanning the control curves and yoke drift numbers. The trace showed no deviation. The pitch register dipped once, corrected clean. There was no overcompensation, no sign of panic or lag. The touch points were smooth, even at cable contact. He traced his finger along the descent vector and froze. This path, he said, we've seen this path before. He pulled up an archived simulator pattern from 4 weeks earlier. Sim load 27 alpha, F-14 recovery drill. Deck pitch scenario matched to sea state 4. The overlay matched 95%. He looked at the name attached to the simulator profile. It's her. She flew this before, in the sim, the room went quiet again. She didn't land by instinct. Someone said after a pause, she landed by design. No one moved. On deck, the drone hovered above the aircraft, rotors whispering. The view showed her figure standing beside the ladder, helmet still on, one hand braced against the jet's body. The crew gave her space. The silence stretched. It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was adjustment. The deck, so often ruled by rank and volume, had found itself quieted by an entry not even listed. A data officer near the rear of CIC watched the landing a second time, his screen showing the tailhook strike in frame-by-frame playback. The wire caught, tension coiled, and the jet held without lateral drift. He leaned back and muttered, "One engine. No assist. No overshoot. That's impossible." Another officer, older, folded his arms and stared at the trace. She remembered the pitch offset. He said, "That hook drop. That was time to wave crest." She read the C by habit. Back outside, Cass began walking toward the hangar access ramp. No one stopped her. Her flight suit clung to her arms. Her boots left faint prints on the steel. The LSO turned to watch her go. He didn't salute. He didn't know if he should. She passed the drone technician who had logged her as observer only. He opened his mouth but didn't speak. She moved past him like fog. Inside the hangar, the air was cooler. The light was dimmer, softened by layers of bulkhead insulation and tool carts. A tech near the far table looked up as she entered, took in her appearance, and said nothing. She peeled off one glove, then the other. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the return of movement after full control. She pressed her palms against the cool edge of the steel table and let the cold seep in. At the far side of the room, a lieutenant stepped away from the comms wall, tablet in hand. He had been watching the footage. His eyes flicked from her face to her flight suit, to the helmet still in her grip. He didn't ask for credentials. He didn't ask what happened. He just said, "We're rewriting the manifest." The next morning began quieter. The weather had settled, and the decks were still slick from the overnight washdown. No launches were scheduled. The ship had shifted to maintenance mode, but the air carried a different kind of current. Not in the wind, but in the glances. People weren't saying it directly, but the phrase had already started circulating. Sim 0 actual, not officially listed, not in the logs, but present, in the way the ready room paused when someone entered. Or how a junior flight tech lowered his voice when describing yesterday's cable catch. Cass walked the line again, this time without gloves. Her helmet stayed clipped low at her hip, still patchless, still unadorned. Her suit had been cleaned, but the salt stain at the knees had faded only slightly. The old familiar ache in her shoulder reminded her that the flight had been real. The bruises behind her ribs confirmed it. She passed by the same F-14 now parked under a sun tarp. Someone had touched up the scuffs on the intake housing. The oil marks from yesterday's landing had been wiped clean, but the tailhook still bore streaks of tension-burnt metal. She ran her palm once along the fuselage and kept walking. Inside the simulator annex, two instructors hovered over a set of projected overlays. One was live footage from the drone, the other, a week-old training run. No one labeled the file aloud, but both men knew what they were looking at. The match was unmistakable. Descent vector, throttle modulation, cable timing all too exact to dismiss as luck. At a corner workbench, a systems tech leafed through a copy of a hand-drawn logbook. Pages of diagrams, all sketched by hand, showed tailhook mechanics and arrestor cable flex angles under sea-state conditions. A younger tech stood nearby, copying a few of the notations into his tablet without saying a word. On a side monitor, someone had pinned a snapshot to the corner of the ready room feed. It showed a single frame from the drone capture Cass climbing down from the cockpit. Below it, typed in small print, were 3 words. 3-wire, solo recovery. In the tool cage, Cass found her old sim notebook tucked back into the space behind her personal locker. It hadn't been there yesterday. Inside, Folded in between pages of throttle decay curves was a sheet of paper she hadn't written. One line, printed in block letters, read, "You were right about the pitch timing." No signature. She placed the note back where she'd found it and closed the cover without comment. She walked the flight deck again by mid-afternoon. The wind had shifted. One of the ready jets sat open for inspection, and Cass stepped around it without slowing. She counted the distance between the arrestor wires without looking down. 2 techs in cranials and vests tracked her briefly as she passed. Neither said her name. High on the catwalk above, the pilot who had ejected stood near the rail. He had his hands in his pockets. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just watched her cross the deck and disappear into the hangar shadows. In one of the training rooms near the forward station, 2 pilots sat reviewing data pulled from the black box. One tapped the trace, paused, then said, "What's a ball fix profile again?" No one answered directly, but one of the others stood and walked to the data wall. He pulled up her archived sim logs and played through one of her old runs in silence. There was no debate after that. Later, Cass stepped into her quarters. She unfastened her vest and set it down with care, then hung her gloves from the hook beside the wall panel. The laminated SIM card she always carried had been in her pocket since the morning. She pulled it out, examined the crease, and placed it gently in a storage tin she kept for spare chart notes. It closed with a soft click. Her console screen was active. A single message waited. It read, "Call sign input," followed by a blank field. The cursor blinked at the end, steady and patient, like it expected something inevitable. Cass stared at it for a while. She didn't touch the keyboard. She stood, picked up her notebook, and flipped to a blank page. This time, she didn't copy a diagram. She didn't transcribe someone else's method. She drew from memory her own. A fresh landing profile. A modified recovery arc for variable C pitch and low ceiling. She marked out the Fresnel shift timing, the half-second throttle cut, and the hook check call-out exactly where it belonged. The cursor on the screen kept blinking. She walked out without entering a name. No official call sign was filed that day. But in the unspoken channels, between systems teams and instructors, between drone techs and pilots, one trace had begun to anchor itself. She didn't ask for a place. She left one, and everyone who mattered had already seen it. She was never meant to fly that day. She was meant to observe, to record, to remain invisible. But when the moment came when everything others relied on fell away, she didn't panic. She didn't protest. She acted, not with fanfare or recognition, but with quiet, trained precision that no one had expected from someone so easily dismissed. This is what strength looks like when no one is watching. It is not loud. It is not showy. It is built in long hours, silent rehearsals, and the decision to step forward when the world still says you cannot. Cass did not claim the spotlight. She simply left a trace the system could no longer ignore. What does this story make you think about? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more quiet, powerful stories of those who serve with skill, humility, and unshakable resolve.